Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, April 11th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The U.S. thinks that an Iranian attack on Israel is imminent. So Bloomberg reported on Wednesday that the U.S. and its allies believe that Iranian retaliation for the Israeli bombing of Iran's consulate in Syria is imminent. Sources told Bloomberg that based on U.S. and Israeli intelligence, Iran or its allies in the region could launch a major missile and drone attack on military and government targets inside Israel in the coming days. There was other reports that said similar things, including one from Axios that said Israel is expecting a direct Iranian attack on its territory launched from Iran's soil. And Israeli sources told the outlet that Israel would respond by launching direct attacks on Iran. That's what they're threatening. Now, Israel has a history of covert attacks inside Iran, assassinations, sabotage attacks, small little drone attacks that are launched from inside Iran, from intelligence assets inside Iran. But this sounds like they're talking about something different, like airstrikes. And realistically, Israel is not really capable of, they don't have heavy bombers that can fly long distances. They would need support from the U.S. to bomb Iran. And I think it's pretty clear that if Iran does something like this, that the U.S. is going to intervene directly. And so there's a lot of questions here. Are these officials, are these reports true? Or is Israel, are the U.S. trying to goad Iran into something? I think it's clear that's exactly what Israel's doing here. They want to provoke a huge war, get the U.S. directly involved. I think that's hard to argue at this point. So keep that in mind, that, Iran is definitely thinking that as well, that this is what Israel wants. But at the same time, this is a huge escalation, bombing an Iranian diplomatic facility and killing one of their most senior generals in the Quds Force. They're going to respond in some way. The U.S. is coordinating with Israel on this. The top U.S. military commander in the Middle East, General Eric Kurilla, he is the head of U.S. Central Command. He's visiting Israel on Thursday to discuss coordination on the potential Iranian attack. I'm sure if they do fire missiles and drones, that the U.S. would probably try to help intercept some, things like that. And President Biden signaled that he would directly intervene if Iran attacks Israel in a warning that he issued on Wednesday. So Biden said when he was asked about this situation, quote, "We also want to address the Iranian threat to launch a significant, they're threatening to launch a significant attack in Israel. As I told Prime Minister Netanyahu, our commitment to Israel's security against these threats from Iran and its proxies is ironclad. Let me say it again, ironclad. We're going to do all we can to protect Israel's security," end quote. And now remember, after October 7th, the U.S. deployed a bunch of extra troops, air defenses, aircraft carriers, things like that, planes, as what they call deterrents, to prevent a bigger war. But that could all be used in a war with Iran. And obviously, what the U.S. has been doing is not deterring anything. They launched this new war against the Houthis in Yemen, all this stuff that happened in Iraq and Syria. So this is definitely something to keep an eye on here. And then I just mentioned some more stuff at the end about, again, something that's really important for people to know. I'm sure if you listen to this show, you're aware. But I think a lot of people aren't aware of Israel's history, going back years and years of assassinating nuclear scientists inside Iran, blowing up, planting bombs in nuclear facilities. All this stuff, even though Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program, they target their nuclear program. And Israel's actually the country. Another thing to keep in mind is that Israel has nukes. Israel has nuclear weapons. It's a secret nuclear stockpile that the U.S. doesn't acknowledge. But if you're Iran right now, that's definitely, you're seeing all this stuff that Israel's doing in Gaza. that's definitely factored into the calculation here. The fact that Israel is this rogue state that's doing all this stuff, and they do have nukes, and they have the U.S. behind them. So we'll see what happens over the next few days. All right, so the next one here, Mossad suspected in killing of a U.S. sanctioned man in Lebanon. So speaking of Israeli assassinations, this article is from Jason Ditz. So in 2019, the U.S. sanctioned the Lebanese man Mohammed Soror on accusations that he funneled tens of millions of dollars from Iran's Quds Force to the Qassem's brigades, which is the armed wing of Hamas. On Tuesday, he was found murdered in a villa in Beit Meri near Beirut. He was shot more than 5 times and was found in possession of an undisclosed sum of money, which the killers did not take. So that means that it was not a robbery. And the immediate suspicion is that he was killed by Israel's Mossad. And this is being reported by Israeli media. This isn't just the Lebanese saying this. So the villa that he was found in was reported to be rented by an unnamed tenant who had simply disappeared after the killing, and his body showed no signs of torture or anything like that. And he worked for Hezbollah's money transfer service Beit al-Mal and was said to be working with Hezbollah operatives to see it that the money reached the Qassem brigades. Israel has regularly targeted Hamas members and those believed to be supporting the group since the Gaza war began in October. And so, Jason's just saying this wouldn't be a surprise. We know Israel launched a drone strike in Beirut, which was a huge escalation. I forget exactly when that was. That was a few months ago. They killed a Hamas official who was involved in the hostage negotiations. All right, so the next one here, Biden walks back his call for a ceasefire in Gaza. So yes, the story I went over yesterday, turns out it was not any sort of shift in Biden's policy toward Israel, and I was very naive to think so. So President Biden on Wednesday walked back a call for Israel to declare a 6 to 8 week ceasefire in Gaza, saying that the truce must be tied to a hostage deal and that it was up to Hamas. So these comments came a day after an interview aired where Biden appeared to say that Israel should unilaterally declare a temporary ceasefire. And if that is what Biden wanted, that would have been a big shift in policy. I didn't see this, but according to the Times of Israel, the White House already walked back what he said, saying that he was referring to a hostage deal that's being negotiated. But Biden said in a press conference on Wednesday, quote, "It's now up to Hamas. They need to move on the proposal that has been made so we can get these hostages home where they belong. It also brings back a 6-week ceasefire that we need now," end quote. So I've been covering some hostage deal stuff. It's really tough to know exactly what's going on, but there's no indication right now that a deal is going to be reached. Hamas is still saying that they want permanent ceasefire, withdrawal of Israeli troops. Netanyahu's not going for that, obviously. But there is also signs that maybe Hamas is willing to compromise on a deal for a 6-week ceasefire, but some of their main demands for that are still not being met. One of them being Palestinians giving them the ability to return to northern Gaza, the ones who fled from there. And that's something Israel does not want to do. So we're back, where we were. Biden refuses to pressure Israel to end its onslaught in Gaza, to end this genocidal war in Gaza, despite the massive civilian casualties and the starvation blockade that Israel is imposing, which has put the entire population in the Strip on the brink of famine. State Department, even the U.S. State Department, has acknowledged that famine could already be taking place in some areas of Gaza. And Biden's not budging, even with all this pressure from within the Democratic Party, from voters. More and more members of Congress are telling him to cut off Israel. But nope, he's just still going full steam ahead here. So the next one here, Trump says that Biden has totally abandoned Israel. So former President Donald Trump said on Wednesday that President Biden has totally abandoned Israel and said that any Jewish Americans who vote for Democrats this November should have their head examined. So Trump has been, we've seen some interesting comments from him recently. He was critical of Israel for sharing images and videos of its destruction of Gaza, saying that that is why Israel's losing public support and international support. And it was interesting because he actually said that in response to a question about the reporter asked, what are you going to do to stem the rising tide of anti-Semitism? And Trump said, oh, well, that's because you're publicizing all this destruction in Gaza, which is true. Israel has been doing that. But at the same time, this is the era of social media, and people are just seeing it, from Palestinian journalists. Not so much now that there's been the communication breakdowns, but in the beginning of this thing, I mean, you could just go on Instagram and just look at horrific aftermaths of airstrikes and dead children being pulled out of the rubble. I mean, the things that I saw in there are just completely horrific. So, people saw that as well, besides what Israel's putting out. So I assume this is what he's saying here is a response to the stuff Biden has been saying lately. And I think it just shows Trump is totally, this idea that Biden's abandoning Israel is complete nonsense. And maybe this is why I fell for his, what he said the other day about the 6 to 8 week ceasefire, because I saw Israeli media, the Times of Israel, very much in favor of what is happening in Gaza. They said, in major policy shift, Biden calls for ceasefire without hostage deal. They seem to be panicking. But this idea, and you see this from big-time Israel supporters in the U.S., claiming, Hamas is in charge of the Biden administration. It's just completely ridiculous. But I think it's worth pointing out, I keep going over this stuff about the election, the protest votes, that the other option, Trump is extremely pro-Israel. He was one of the most pro-Israel presidents of all time, moving their embassy, recognizing Israeli control of the Golan Heights. Lots of other things, basically declaring illegal settlements in the West Bank, not that they're saying that they're not illegal, all sorts of things that led to the tensions rising in the situation that we're in today. So I just figured it was worth pointing out. And again, it's just this idea that Biden is abandoning Israel. It's just simply not true. He's still giving them everything they want when it comes to the military aid. All right, so the next one here, Israel kills sons and grandchildren of Hamas leaders. So Ismail Haniyeh, who is the leader of Hamas's political bureau, said Israeli airstrikes killed 3 of his sons and 4 of his grandchildren in the Gaza Strip on Wednesday. Israel confirmed targeting his sons, but said that it did not have information about the killing of the grandchildren. Notice that they didn't deny that they killed the grandchildren, and that included 3 girls and 1 boy. I didn't see anything about their age. But they were killed in a strike on a car in the western part of the El Shati refugee camp in Gaza City. So the Israeli military claimed that Haniyeh's family was on their way to carry out terror activity, is what Israel said. But their relatives inside Gaza said that the 3 sons and 4 grandchildren were traveling to meet family for Eid al-Fitr, which is the Muslim holiday that marks the end of Ramadan. So Haniyeh, and I don't know if I said, he's based in Qatar. Haniyeh said that the killing of his sons and grandchildren won't impact ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas. He said that a total of 60 of his relatives have been killed by Israel. He said, quote, all our people and all families of Gaza residents have paid a heavy price with the blood of their children, and I am one of them. The occupation believes that by targeting the sons of leaders, it will break the resolve of our people. We say to the occupation that this blood will only make us more steadfast in our principles and attachment to our land, end quote. And then I just mentioned again, he also said explicitly that this isn't going to affect the negotiations and that Hamas is sticking to their demands, to their conditions for a ceasefire. And the reality is they know that if they give up all the hostages, then their leverage is gone. And then there's also the reality of that the hostages are dying. Again, that Haaretz recently reported, which I think went way under the radar, that Israel thinks only 60 to 70 of the Israeli hostages out of about 130 are still alive. And they said that number could actually be lower. So it could be another reason why Hamas hasn't agreed to anything yet, is the fact that they might not have that many hostages to give. And all the reports I've seen that the deal they've been talking about for a while would be a 6-week ceasefire for Hamas releasing 40 Israeli hostages. All right. I know another part of it would be them releasing the bodies of people who died. All right. So the next one here, top Democrat questions F-15 sale to Israel. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. And it says one of the top-ranking Democratic members of the House questioned a sale of 50 fighter jets to Israel as Israeli forces conduct a brutal war against Gaza. An increasing number of Democrats are now opposed to unconditional military aid and weapon sales to Israel. However, top U.S. officials insist that the policy of unconditional support has not changed. So this is Representative Gregory Meeks. He's a Democrat from New York. He's the top Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And he expressed that his concerns. So this is the $18 billion sale that that the Biden administration is going to approve. And basically the process is that they bounce it off the leaders of the House and Senate Foreign Affairs Committees. And if they don't raise any objection, then they formally approve the sale. And then it creates a time period when Congress could potentially block it. But if Meeks raising objections could slow it down. So he's saying, I think, that he wants some sort of assurances. He said, quote, I want to know what types of weapons and what the weapons would be utilized for. I don't want the kinds of weapons that Israel has utilized to have more deaths. I want to make sure that humanitarian aid gets in. I don't want starving people starving to death. And I want Hamas to release the hostages, and I want a two-state solution, end quote. So Meeks, I mean, as far as I know of him, he's a total hawk. So this is, again, another sign of the change, the growing change when it comes to Democrats, moderate, centrist Democrats starting to question this unconditional support for Israel. So it's definitely significant, whatever's happening, and hopefully at some point this is enough to change something. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if, the next day he just says, all right, you could go through with it. And then the actual process of blocking the sale is really hard to do. They would have to pass legislation, which that wouldn't pass, because virtually all Republicans would favor it, and there would be enough Democrats still supportive of it. So they wouldn't be able to block it through legislation. All right, so the next one here, Biden undercounted Ukraine spending by $14 billion. So the Biden administration has admitted that it massively undercounted what it has spent on the proxy war in Ukraine. And this was reported by the American Conservative on Tuesday. It was an exclusive over there. The report said that the White House's Office of Management and Budget had previously estimated the U.S. has spent $111 billion on the war. And for over a year, a group of members of Congress pressed the OMB, that's the White House Office of Management and Budget, and they pressed them to figure out the real number, and recently found that it was $125 billion, $14 billion more than what the White House had previously claimed. In a letter sent to the director of the OMB on Tuesday, Senator J.D. Vance, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, and 15 other members of Congress said that they, quote, now have confirmation from OMB that the total Ukraine spending figure is significantly higher than the administration has ever admitted, end quote. The lawmakers asked OMB Director Shalanda Young to answer a series of questions about U.S. spending on the proxy war and gave her a deadline of April 30th to answer these questions. And the letter also noted that the Biden administration still has $4 billion in what they call presidential drawdown authority for Ukraine. That lets the U.S. send weapons directly from military stockpiles. The Pentagon hasn't used it because they say they don't have the money to replace the weapons. And this $4 billion is funds that they magically found. They said, we found an accounting error that overvalued the weapons for Ukraine, and it gave them another $6 billion. And they used about $2 billion of it. So they have $4 billion left, but they say they don't have money to replace the weapons. Yet we have seen them figure out ways to still send weapons to Ukraine. Last month, they announced the new $300 million arms package for Ukraine. And they claim that they found the money from the U.S. Army budget, even though you've had the Pentagon say that they need $10 billion to replace things they've sent to Ukraine. It just doesn't make any sense, the things that they're saying. And we know that they could always just find the money if they want. So anyway, I mean, that's a pretty big margin of error there, $14 billion more. And if Biden gets the $60 billion that he wants, then that would bring total spending on this thing to $185 billion. All right, so the next one here is some big news. Biden says that he is considering dropping the charges against Julian Assange. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is President Biden saying something, so take it for what it's worth, but I think this is a good moment to increase the pressure. So President Biden on Wednesday said that he's considering a request from Australia to drop the charges against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who's being targeted for exposing U.S. war crimes through standard journalism. The Australian government has recently stepped up its pressure on the Biden administration to end its persecution of Assange, who is an Australian citizen. Biden was asked about the Australian request on Wednesday, and he said, "We're considering it." So that was his response. Again, this is Joe Biden we're talking about, but it's the first that we've seen any U.S. government official say that. So far, I haven't seen it get walked back. Let's hope that we don't see that. But the DOJ, the Department of Justice, first indicted Assange under the Espionage Act during the Trump administration in 2019. And that was when Assange was arrested at the Ecuadorian embassy, dragged out of there, and put in London's Belmarsh prison. And that was April 11th, 2019. So that was 5 years ago. So he's been held in London's Belmarsh prison on no charges for 5 years, awaiting the extradition, the results of it, of the hearings. And so, again, the thing to stress here is that these charges against him of espionage are for WikiLeaks publishing classified documents obtained by a source. And that was related to the Afghan and Iraq wars and the State Department cables. So going back to 2010, 2011 was when WikiLeaks published this stuff. If you remember, the collateral murder video showed a U.S. Airstrike that killed Reuters journalists. Very important stuff, and that's what they're trying to lock him up for. And he would face 175 years in prison if he's convicted on all charges. So this is a huge case. So we have this talk of possibly a plea deal and all that, but a plea deal could still set the bad precedent for the First Amendment and for press freedom. So the thing that WikiLeaks is saying Americans should do is contact their House representatives and tell them to support this bill that's been introduced in the House. It's HRes 934. You can find this information in the article. And you call your representative in the House and you tell them to support this bill that calls for the U.S. to drop the charges against Assange. So find your representative in the House, call them, and I would say send them an email as well. I just think it's a good opportunity with Biden saying this. It's in the news. Let's increase the pressure here. All right, so the next one here, House votes down extending mass surveillance. So this is an article from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So a group of 19 House Republicans bucked GOP leadership and voted with Democrats against a bill that would extend Section 702 of FISA, and this is the law that allows for mass surveillance and the collection of Americans' data. On Wednesday, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson brought the legislation up for a procedural vote, and it failed 193 to 228. The Republican opposition was made up of a group of freedom-oriented representatives led by Matt Gaetz. Gaetz said in a statement, quote, "The reauthorization lacks essential reforms to protect Americans' Fourth Amendment rights, such as requiring the FBI to obtain a warrant before searching Americans' data and a prohibition on the government purchasing Americans' data from third-party data brokers. FISA authorities have been used to violate the law more than 278,000 times by the national security state, and there has yet to be any consequences for this illegal activity by our government," end quote. So he criticized Speaker Johnson for letting this bill come to the floor without the reforms. So Trump, before the vote, he posted on his Truth social media site, I'll just read. He said, quote, "Kill FISA. It was illegally used against me and many others. They spied on my campaign," end quote, which is true. But Trump also signed an extension of the program when he was in the White House. So got to point that out. But so Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that known as FISA, that was it was extended to April 19th. This April 19th, it was included in the National Defense Authorization Act. They slipped it in. But according to this article from Kyle, he cites a report from the Wall Street Journal that says that even if it doesn't get extended after April 19th, the surveillance can continue for at least another year. It could potentially continue for another year due to how and when the secretive court that oversees the program grants annual approval for the categories of intelligence collection it allows. So whatever it says, it's kind of confusing the way that that's worded. This is just a case of if they want to keep doing it, they have the ability, although they could face legal challenges if people in Congress really fight this thing, which it seems like some are definitely dedicated to doing that. And again, so this allows surveillance of Americans without warrants, and the way it does it is that it says that it only targets foreigners, so they can't just target Americans with this, but they actually can, because of this huge loophole in this Section 702 is the fact that if an American is talking to a foreigner, they can collect that data of that conversation. So it's all this warrantless surveillance. I mean, I talk to people outside of the country every day. So, there it is. There they have the loophole to monitor what we're saying. So it's a really big deal. So it's good that at least there's this fight against it. So the last story here is some good news. Chinese President Xi Jinping meets with Taiwan's ex-leader in historic Beijing talks. So Xi met with Ma Ying-jeou, Taiwan's former president. He was president from 2008 to 2016. They met actually when Ma was president in Singapore in 2015, which was a huge deal at the time. But this is also a big deal because this is the first time ever since 1949 that a Taiwanese, a former, either current or former Taiwanese leader met with a Chinese leader in the mainland. And this is good because the Ma is still influential in the Kuomintang party, which is the main opposition party. He played a role in trying to get the Kuomintang and the other opposition party, the Taiwan People's Party, to run a joint ticket together. But the talks kind of broke down, and that failed. And the U.S. was poking around in that as well. And so anyway, Ma meets with Xi, and they said some good things. President Xi Jinping, this article is from the South China Morning Post. He told Ma Ying-jeou in Beijing on Wednesday that there is no problem that cannot be talked through. War would be unbearable, responded Ma, who is close to wrapping up an 11-day journey of peace to the mainland following a landmark visit just over a year ago. The pair met in Singapore in 2015, as I mentioned, which was the first cross-strait summit since the two sides split in 1949 following a civil war. The highlight of that meeting was an 80-second handshake ahead of the closed-door talks. So now we have... again, this is just good, and this is what we want to see is the mainland and Taiwan talking. So hopefully the Kuomintang has influence. They have the speakership in Taiwan's parliament, even though the DPP has the presidency. I think the president is going to be inaugurated next month in May. So there's other Asia news that I didn't go over today. Biden hosted Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at the White House, and they announced some new cooperation. But I'm just going to wait till tomorrow That was on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, Biden's going to hold a trilateral summit with Kishida and then the Philippines president. So there's going to be a lot there. So I'm just going to kind of combine that. And that's all about the buildup against China in the region. So go check out our Viewpoints, one from Ted Snyder, how big a factor is Iran in the war on Gaza. One from James Carden, the U.S. should adopt the Mearsheimer plan. One from Stavrula Pabst, not enough war on the ground. The U.S. is taking it to space. One from Karen Greenberg, peril of forgetting Guantanamo. One from John Weeks, diagnosing Israel's imperial narcissism. So please go check all of that stuff out. Go check out our blog and all that good stuff. So you could always support this show by sharing it. Tell your friends, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. Follow us on Instagram. It's looking really great over there. And follow us on Twitter or X. You can follow me over there. I've just been celebrating how upset all the pro-Israel right-wingers are about Tucker interviewing that Palestinian Christian pastor. I think it's a real moment when it comes to politics in the U.S. You know, I think in the long term, Israel is in trouble when it comes to this support from the U.S. A lot more people are opposing this idea of unconditional support for Israel. Hopefully that translates to a change in the short term. Unfortunately, we're not seeing that yet. But I think, again, in the long term, I think Israel's in trouble. But anyway, that is it. I will be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.